Okay, you all gave such beautiful talks. So much to cover. To start with, Fred, you gave a kind of survey of where we've got to, and one question that has been submitted, which is a lovely sort of starting point, is that nuclear medicine is, as a discipline, is almost 100 years old. Why has it taken quite so long to be widely available to patients? Of course, you've all addressed that, parts of that question in your talks, but Fred, would you like to address that, and anybody else?
Thank you. It's a very interesting question. I think that the major issues that hampered the emerging aspects of nuclear medicine was caused by the complexity of nuclear medicine, handling radiopharmaceuticals, all kinds of regulations and rules made it quite expensive and difficult to grow rapidly. And I think, in my feeling, nuclear medicine still became quite small specialty over the years, and only since PET came into the market, that imaging came into the market, nuclear medicine evolved very, very rapidly. Nuclear medicine became more important in oncology, and this area is so much important in these days in medicine. And since then, nuclear medicine evolved better and better.
Thank you.
It had to do with the complexity, I think. Maybe some of the other speakers have a different opinion, but
if I may add, you know, that's I started nuclear medicine 20 years ago. That was the time that it was very old camera, like Fred just said, and it was only the treatment with the radioiodine. It was not attractive. But now, if you know, there are a lot of ongoing on this research area with the new target for this diagnosis as well for the therapy, with the new kind of the radiopharmaceuticals. Helen told us how is difficult the way to achieve these products on the market. But this is really important for us, and this is the changing the game. And in my personal opinion, I think that the PSMA is this major now, the playing on the game, and that will be the change a lot of the field of nuclear medicine. Because till now, this radioiodine, it was, of course, well known. Neuroendocrine tumors, I love it. I work with patients, and I think that the Fazio have the same kind of experience. It's really good working, but it was the small number of the patient. But with the PSMA, it will be growing, and we need to be prepared. And with this thing that we needed for it, but we have in the pipeline, like the Ken told us, that we have the new kind of the targets, and probably that will be coming very soon, because now we have the experience how to use it.
Yeah. Okay, Nicola, do you want? Please.
I also remember that in the years before 2000. When clinicians ask for some type of scan, except for pulmonary emboli, it may take a week before the report arrives for the clinician, and they didn't care. It is very, very strange to hear that now, but in these days, nuclear medicine was not so challenging, not so important, and like Jolanta said, there's so much changed around the century.
Yes, if I may, thank you for the question. Yes, I agree that it's a critical question, and I agree with the Fred and Jolanta's comments about the fact that the reasons why there was a so long time to arrive at the approval of some radiopharmaceutical in clinical practice. Probably the reasons were several and different. Some of them are related to the disease, some others are related to the local rules, and of course it's quite different for me, for example, as a clinician. I can understand that it's much more difficult to design a clinical trial for a radiopharmaceutical compared with our drugs, for example. I can report my experience in Italy, for example. We used PRRT in neuroendocrine tumors since the 90s. And of course, at that time, the PRRT was based on a single institution's initiatives all over the world. First of all, in Rotterdam, as Fred well knows. But at that time, of course, these single local initiatives, of course, couldn't lead to an approval. And after 2 decades, we arrived to design the first phase 3 trial. That, of course, in clinical oncology is quite common. No? So the investments were missing, and of course it was also due to the interest of the first company involved in the field. So I think that the reasons are more than one. And I agree with Yolanda that now time changed. Now it's much easier now to go ahead, for example, in prostate cancer compared with the neuroendocrine tumors that are rare cancers. With the PSMA, it could be theoretically much easier to go ahead to design trials covering several settings of the clinical practice. So I think that now the time will shorten going ahead. That's my opinion.
Thank you very much indeed. Marvelous. Thank you for your thoughtful replies. Okay, we have lots of questions coming in, so in no particular order. One for Helen, since you spoke last. Lydia Kuna asks why she observes a tendency over the years for regulations to become more stringent without there being supporting evidence for those changes. Do you agree with that statement? And if so, why do you think it's happening?
Well, they always say if you want to continue a job, then work in regulatory, because the regulations only get more complicated and more numerous as time goes on. Why does that happen? It's in part because of the myriad of different types of therapies. I mean, we in NMEU think that we're special with radiopharmaceuticals, just-in-time manufacturing. We have CAR T cells as well. Biotechnology gave rise to a whole raft of guidances, and that's why one of the reasons that EMA was developed was to deal with biological assessment. So yes, it does get more complicated because diseases don't get more complicated, but the way they're dealt with is becoming ever increasingly sophisticated. We've talked about the theranostic part and the fact that radiotherapies have been around for a century, but it's becoming more sophisticated and how it's being used by patients. Ultimately, all these regulations are there for the safety of the patient. What can be done up front before it's even got into a patient to sort of give a hint that it will be safe. And there's a lot of medicinal products that don't make it into humans. And so that's why, really, it's for the safety of patients.
Thank you, Helen. I don't know if anybody else wanted to pick up on that point. Please feel free if you do, but no compulsion to do so. No volunteers. Okay. Having you all together seems a marvelous opportunity to discuss what needs to be done in anticipation of the expected increase in demand for theranostics. That could be answered at many levels. What kind of structural changes are needed? What changes in institutions? Who would like to step into that first? Maybe Yolanda, from the point of view of medical training or hospital design or anything.
You know, that's the most important is to understand each other's, and that the clinician will understand how to use and how is, you know, the patient preparation, how is this all this way for this patient management with, because as I told during my talk, it's, and Helen pointed that the radionuclide therapy is different than the normal drugs. This is the starting point. And this is the one of the most important point that we need to sit together, because now we have the experience with the neurocrine tumors, but in the others multidisciplinarity, nuclear medicine physicians should be involved. It must be involved for this all this therapy planning, because without this will be nothing in the end. Because if the clinician will be planning, for example, the treatment schedule for the Wednesday, but delivery of the isotopes is on Friday, it's not make sense. This very practical reason. But on the other hand, please remember that in majority of European countries, we have the regulation to use some kind of the radiation on this nuclear medicine department wards, and we need it for the facility. And with the growing number of the patient, we need to think about the therapy beds with this, you know, establishing the facility, which is quite costly, with this dedicated staff, with this all the monitoring, as well with the tanks for the waste management. It is really important, because that will be, you know, the staying for the decay time. And that is the thing that all these things we must take into the consideration with the growing number of the patient.
Thank you very much indeed. Who else would like to come in? Nicola.
Yes, I think that theragnostic can have several different impacts on our clinical practical job. As of course, theragnostic, I think from a clinical point of view, is the basis of any clinical approach to any patient. But nuclear medicine probably is the best example of the theragnostic. With the same tool, you can do diagnosis and therapy. So it's theoretically the best. But of course, what theragnostic can change in our multidisciplinary team practice? I think that first of all, it can change our mentality, as we are used sometimes to start from therapy. For example, we have several examples of very good multidisciplinary teams just focused on therapy, on treatment. And of course, in that case, you demand the diagnostic part to other centers, other doctors, and so on. But all of us know that the best basis for the best therapy is the right diagnosis, the right diagnostic approach. So just for that, theragnostic should be our critical key point for the multidisciplinary team, as we should start from the beginning of the clinical history of the patient. That's the point. And I think that now, for example, for neuroendocrine tumors, we have the opportunity to do that, to change our organization in the MDT, just starting from the beginning. From the beginning means to be sure about the right diagnosis. And therefore, the theragnostic tool of nuclear medicine now can give us the best way to characterize the disease from the beginning. And that is also the best way to arrive to the best treatment. That's my opinion.
Thank you very much indeed. Do you think it requires a change in medical training, though? Do you think you have to change the way doctors are educated? Please.
To me?
Yes.
To me?
Yes, please. Yes. And then to Yolanda, but both of you, yes.
Okay, so the question is if this can change the training of the figures involved in the field, irrespective of the specialty.
Yeah.
Yes, I think yes, it should change our way of training. As of course, I think that multidisciplinary team is not rather a physical organization or a structural organization, but it should be a philosophy. It should be a sort of way of approaching. And of course, if we manage patients with neuroendocrine tumors, it's logical that all of us should think in a similar way, should approach in a similar way, and that is a different training compared with the training related to the single specialty. Therefore, we need a common training. And also, I would like to take the opportunity of this discussion to say that within the European Society of Neuroendocrine Tumors, the INETS, we are working on this point to create a figure of the net specialist. And the net specialist is irrespective of the single specialty. So the endocrinology, the nuclear medicine expert, the oncologist, all of them should be trained in a similar way. And of course, should have a similar curriculum. And that is my answer, that of course, this theragnostic should change our way of training.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a sorry, maybe there's a feedback, but okay. It sounds, of course, the perfect way forward, but given that you're trying to do this, what are the challenges that you face in trying to change the way that people view that they have to have an expanded view of specialization? Does that go down well? Do people embrace that approach, or is there a challenge there?
Yes, it's quite challenging, in my opinion, to arrive at, and this, of course, will be probably a pathway requiring several years, of course. But the first critical step, yes, I think it's to change our approach. And the challenging points could be that all of us are usually related to our specific training, to our specific society. And of course, we need some scientific society based on the topic. And INETS is one of the few societies related to the disease rather than to the specialties. So it means that if I am a medical oncologist, of course, I am a member of the European Society of Medical Oncology, okay? And that should be for me a general reference for my global training. But if I would like to approach to NET patients, I need to speak routinely with our other colleagues from other specialties, as that is the best way to learn, that is the best way to grow, and that is the philosophy of the multidisciplinary team. So it's not enough to have the best radiologist in the team, as the best radiology couldn't be enough to treat or to manage a NET patients. But the best radiology should discuss every week with the best oncologist, and both should be interested and involved in the field. And that is the main critical point that we should try to overcome.
Thank you very much indeed. Yolanda, same question.
If I may add, because you know that is exactly that was addressed for the European Union, and with the tender, which was the Erasmus program done. Because you know that they've just realized that radionuclide therapy is different and that needed, this multidisciplinarity approach. And that we create together with the consortium members, with the different, the part of all this team, this radioligand academy. And I agree with Fazio that the most important is to sit together and to discuss about the patient. But that this education, it should be a little different, because this nuclear medicine, they are preparing, they have a lot of the courses during this SMIT, and they know how to use the therapy and how is therapy works. But this clinician needs another type of the education. Nuclear medicine will need the more clinician, that they need to more to know about the disease. How is this therapy schedule? How is the management of the patient? Because nuclear medicine is not only the one approach for this patient. We could, for the neurocrine tumors, we have the cold somatostatin analogs, we have everolimus, we have the sunitinib, and where is the place of each of the therapy? And they discuss together in the multidisciplinary team. The same will be for the prostate cancer patient. And as you can see, that all this part of the team need the education. For the nuclear medicine physician, it should be more the education by the clinical part, but for this non-clinical part, it should be this the understanding what nuclear medicine could give them. Like Nicola told us, this phenotyping of the disease, this imaging of our patient, as well all this patient management after that. That that it's always the complexity of each of these things.
If I could also add as well, from a regulatory perspective, when imaging agents are approved, and indeed when the therapies come through, often, well, with each of these products through the centralised procedure, there will be a risk management plan, and often training is part of that approval. And so many of the diagnostics will have a training programme to ensure the appropriate diagnostic readability of the scans, etc. So it just builds on what Yolanda has already raised as well. So the regulators do also look at the training aspects, but absolutely there is a need, I think, for the broader mechanics of it all, of, is it being made on a Thursday rather than a Monday that you're booking the patients in for?
Thank you very much, Helen. Fred?
There's also a lot of practical issues. Right now we are in the middle of the PSMA discussions, and compared to neuroendocrine tumors, patients with prostate cancer who can be treated with lutetium PSMA are 10 times more frequently occurring than neuroendocrine tumors. In most departments of nuclear medicine throughout the country, these departments have only one or sometimes two beds for patients to treat them with radionuclides, which is an issue. We have to develop a program to have more treatment facilities in the hospitals. And will that be in every hospital, or will that be centralized in larger, especially academic hospitals? That's a discussion we have to go through. On top of that, it means that we have to select more money for that. The lutetium PSMA is about as expensive as Lutathera, for instance, but then 10 times more, because we have 10 times more patients for that. So this will have a huge impact on the cost of treatment of these patients. It is, and I think it will be growing. At this moment, we are looking at patients with end-stage disease, but I expect that also patients with hormone-naive situations will be treated with lutetium PSMA in the future as well, which means a lot more patients. So there are many practical issues, and we shouldn't wait starting the discussions with government, hospitals, etc., etc. There's so much to do.
Sorry, on that topic, Fred, who else needs to be involved in the conversation about this? I mean, already there are many disciplines mentioned, and many different factors come together. But who else does this conversation need to expand to include?
I think it starts with collaboration with the urologists and oncologists, and maybe even the radiotherapists, because they are our brothers in this situation. And if we work together, closely together, and go to health insurance companies and authorities together, then we'll have a large impact, a much larger impact than when we go there alone. Collaboration is key in this situation.
Thank you. Others, please.
I think that Fred touched the point which is the most important, that we need to start talking with the regulatory. And Helen, probably you will give us a little of the advice, because you know that now are on the beginning, and we were waiting for 25 years for the Netter trials. After that, we were waiting for, you know, this long way of the registration and reimbursement. And now this PSMA is coming, and if we will be wait the longer without the talking with the regulation how to deal with this, that will be, you know, that we will be losing the time, and this therapy will be registered but available for the patient after 2 years. Helen, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I know that this reimbursement process is about 12-14 months even in very good scenario.
Absolutely. The reimbursement part, really, the development programs need to be incorporating reimbursement considerations at phase 2 onwards. And within Europe, we're talking about oncology drugs here, so that is definitely the centralised process. So it is a one-stop shop for the whole of Europe. Health technology assessments, however, is done on a national basis, and it's very much each member state. And therefore, one can imagine the complexities of trying to have sufficient information and relevant information that satisfies all those different member states. It is very challenging. And the EMA are working really hard actually to try and bring those HTAs together. Post-Brexit, the UK has very much thought, no, this is something that is stopping medicines getting to patients. So they've introduced this Innovations Passport, where the Health Technology Assessment, NICE, and the Scottish Medicines Consortium and the Welsh Payments Agency as well, they're all around the table at the same time. And I think that's what Europe is hoping can happen as well, there, to just bring these HTAs together.
Thank you. Fazio, you wanted to come in.
Yes, yes, I think that I agree with Fred that the comparison lutetium and PSMA or NET and prostate is not the case to be done, as of course they are two different contexts. NETs are rare tumors, prostate cancer are quite frequent, and I agree that the training in that case, in the case of the prostate cancer, the training of the nuclear medicine centers should be differently managed compared with the NET, as the NET are usually more centralized to some specific centers, and of course there is already a sort of a common culture, no? So it's it's easier for the nuclear medicine to be involved in the NET patient management with these new tools compared with the prostate cancer. But of course, it's not the case to discuss using the comparison between the different fields, as of course we don't need to discuss that, as of course the training should be a technical training to get the right expertise for each specialty, and the clinical training to get the right clinical approach. Okay, so I think that in this case the NET experience could be even be considered a sort of model, as of course in NET for many years we didn't have an absolute evidence, and the first therapies were approved over the last years. So in NET, the clinical discussion, the clinical thinking is still now one of the critical points of the clinical management of the patient. And this, in my opinion, could be utilized as a sort of model of approaching to also other fields, including prostate cancer, when we have many options, many therapeutical options compared with NETs. Okay, so I think that we should develop a new philosophy, and of all the scientific societies should be to give the message related to the topic rather than to the technical training of the single specialty.
Thank you very much indeed. So in your sorry, Fred, please go on.
Yeah, may I add a few words? When I talked about colleagues collaborating with us and trying to achieve new developments, I forgot to mention the patients. For instance, when you take prostate cancer, the typical prostate cancer patient is in his 60s or 70s, retired, has a lot of time, is fully aware of what's happening on the internet and knows everything about new developments with treatments, is involved, at least in most European countries, in the development of new trials. In this country, it is completely forbidden to start new trials without consulting the patients. And that is extremely important. And they are strong and well organized also. For instance, there's an European organization, LUOMO or something like that, and they are strong. They are well organized and represented. And we need to collaborate, of course, with these organizations that will really help to achieve new developments. Sorry for forgetting that before.
No. Well, it's been absolutely sort of highlighted in the program, of course, of the meeting, in that we began with the voice of the patients. Yeah. In your fascinating reflections, you've all focused very much on the practitioners and how the practitioners must collaborate and widen the circle of conversation. In her opening remarks, Maria de Graça Carvalho drew a link between nuclear medicine and AI and spoke about AI. I'd be very interested to know how you think AI is going to impact on nuclear medicine and change things, if it is. Would anybody like to address that? Fred, are you feeling bold?
It's a difficult issue. I think in radiology it's quite clear that AI can really help a lot, and is already helping a lot with the interpretation of particular disease types. But I don't know so much. We're trying to make, coming back to PSMA again, we're trying to develop an AI program for reading the PET scans, but you need so many studies to create a common denominator for this. We're not there, but I think it could really help in the right interpretation of the images. I think, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose, yes, from a regulatory standpoint, Helen.
May I add something about this artificial intelligence to this Fred talk? Because you know that it's still the place, you know, that with the imaging is really difficult, but you know that the something it's ongoing and it will probably happen, helping us with the dosimetry. You know, this dosimetry for the patients is really difficult, and this physics are not working with the one-step dosimetry to have the one scan, and basis on this one scan to recalculate this dosimetry for the patient. And this is perfect example in nuclear medicine for the artificial intelligence. That I agree completely with the Fred that with the imaging, we try to do it, but it's not so easy like in radiology. Radiology, you have the density, it's very clear how to do it. You have a lot of the imaging, but here each of the patient is different, and we have the different variety of this uptake. But with the dosimetry, with this kind of these things, that it could be, you know, that's really, really useful. That we see the place, but you know that is that's starting, not so, you know, this like you know, the advanced like in the radiology.
Well, interesting you should mention that, Yolanda, because in fact a question had come in from Rochelle asking pretty much exactly that. Where does dosimetry stand in relation to radioligand therapy? So thank you very much.
If I may, Adam,
Please.
if I may say something from a clinical point of view on the AI, how can AI help us in our clinical practice? I think that we should also consider how it can help us in terms of research. As of course now, we need AI within our clinical trials, and one of the most critical points, not only for the radiopharmaceutical options, but also for other therapies, is the lack of predictive factors. As for example, we talk about theragnostic. So theragnostic is a wonderful term that, of course, gives the idea that if you get the right characterization with some tracer, you automatically found the therapy. Yes, that is right in terms of the decision making, but it's not enough to arrive to the effectiveness of the therapy. As, for example, the somatostatin receptor in NETs are, of course, the main selection factors for patients who have to be treated with PRRT. But it doesn't mean that all patients will benefit from that. So we need some predictive factor, even within the theragnostic approach. So I think that AI could give us a new tool. Of course, it should be a global effort to put together our series and to design large trials, very well designed, in order to define some predictive factors related, for example, to the imaging, to the functional imaging, that could improve also the theragnostic option that we have now.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, Helen, last word to you. We're almost out of time, but you have a couple of minutes, please.
Right. Well, dosimetry was just touched on by Yolanda, and I'd just like to pull up on that, because absolutely, dosimetry is an incredibly precise way of establishing whether a patient would benefit to the nth degree from a particular therapeutic. It's not necessarily the full way that the phase 3 studies are being run, and often one has, it is more of the approach of one has using the imaging agents to select for the patients who will then go on for the therapy. And I think also we do need to still consider the patient in that sense, because how much more radiation dosing in order to achieve their aims. If the phase 3 studies show that it should be efficacious, then that would be great. But yes, artificial intelligence, there's a myriad of regulations around that as well. They're medical devices, and we'd need to, again, use all that information, a whole host of information, in order to show that they do what we hope that they do.
But in terms of mining vast quantities of data, which presumably are overwhelming everybody a lot of the time, do you think AI has a strong role?
Well, the human brain is incredibly good. So the imagers who read these scans are able to pick up things that, have they? Yes, they probably will do. It won't be in the next year or so. It's going to take a long time to get that information in, and then it's going to need to be tested in the real world. But absolutely, there's obviously a desire for these systems, and the more that people use them, go, it doesn't work so well here, how can we tweak it? And they will improve. But the human brain is an incredible thing to displace.
Thank you. Well, one thing's for sure, that's a topic that we'll be discussing for years and years and years to come. So it's been such a pleasure speaking to you all. Thank you very much indeed. It's been an amazing morning of information, so thought-provoking, a marvelous overview and view into the future. So thank you all very much indeed. And it only remains for me to pass over to Adonis Kalemis, who is president of the NMEU, for some closing remarks. But from me, it's goodbye. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Hello from my side as well. I have the unpleasant task to close this event. Unpleasant because it was so nice to have all of you here, and also looking at the interest in the questionnaires. For me, I have only 3 things to say. I would like to thank very much the audience who invested the time to be with us today, and I hope that we illustrate a little bit some tasks, some topics in nuclear medicine that perhaps were not so clear. You can always reach out to an NMEU for further questions. I'm pretty sure also to ENM if we can both associations can answer any questions that follows from this discussion. I'd like very much to thank the speakers, all of you who participated and make this event interesting and useful, hopefully. And last but certainly not least, I would like to thank Miss Gracia Carvalho from the European Parliament for opening this event and for the interest that she showed to our discipline. So thank you all, and see you soon, most likely, hopefully, in flesh and bone next year. Bye-bye.